Did you get into it yet?
Yeah, no, I'm through the first couple of chapters, and I've gotten through the teal and all of that, so I'm about a third of the way through the book.
Excellent.
Good book.
Yeah,
Recommended it to a client.
yeah, because he said, according to, I think he's from Finland, Sweden, or something, but
France.
France, that's right. So his research is on longitudinal studies of different size organizations and
Right.
difference between those that survive and those that thrive.
And
Yep.
what's the conclusion that the book ultimately reaches?
Well, he talks about that three-legged uh, stool in terms of self-management. So it's giving these people autonomy to do the things that they need to do. And oftentimes that's kind of quite complex and hierarchical, and particularly how it's structured. So it's not the structure itself, but like, is there free flow of information, that kind of thing. And so self-management, wholeness, and by wholeness, he means this idea of, again, can people come and be the best version of themselves, or do they have to hold back some kind of aspect of themselves? Because then you're not getting, if they don't feel that safe, secure, happy, and healthy, as we always talk about. So then he talked about the evolution of purpose. And that's really, purpose isn't the destination per se, as it is the thing that kind of evolves everything together and synthesize everything together. So how do you keep people aligned with that and connected to their own purpose? So he talks about this evolution of purpose.
And those are the three feet of the stool?
Yes.
Okay.
He has some other kinds of variables that go along with each one of those that his research was based off of. But he said those were the main consistent things that he's seen in organizations that thrive.
And is this whole idea about you said wholeness, self-management, what was it?
Self-management, wholeness, and evolution of purpose.
Right. Do employees start in that model, or do they evolve into this at a certain point in time? I mean, like how much time does someone have to have before you would feel comfortable allowing them to self-manage?
Yeah, those organizations that he surveyed, I forget how many, but they were like thousands and thousands. They actually had pipelines of evolving people that's talent. So it's like they had a pipeline of leadership, a pipeline of all these different kinds of things. Like, so they had specific hiring and strategic hiring processes that facilitated that.
Right.
And the same thing with the wholeness and evolution of purpose. So these were just really organizations that were strategically designed and around their vision and purpose and what they wanted to do, how they wanted to do it.
Right. And so at what point did these companies formalize this model? And again, I suppose I could read the book to find out the whole history of the thing. I'm just kind of curious. Did the model come from the research? He saw the patterns, and these are the patterns. Which makes me wonder then, did the companies know that they were doing these patterns?
No, they didn't know. Some of them kind of stumble into it just because they were just sick and tired of going through high employee recidivisms and that kind of thing. And so they kind of changed their ways. And, some of these industries, kind of like even that truly human leadership, the Barry Miller, that's a manufacturing company, $1 billion valuated company. And they base things on not what leadership does, but how they make people feel.
Yeah.
And so that was a strategic thing that the CEO just decided that, what we're doing isn't working. Let's switch and see what happens.
Hey,
Right.
Brian, did you notice the similarities to the spiral dynamics?
Exactly, exactly. I think that's probably where he got it from.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
Well, and then I guess one of the things that I guess jumping into this believing is that these actually end up then being tension management techniques that result in high performing organizations.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And so when
Absolutely.
I look at something like an evolution of purpose, well, that to me resonates with the upgrade maneuver about awakening emotions, changing the task. So because obviously the task is the purpose. And we do talk about when people are too far down grid, they do represent untapped potential, unfulfilled missions, unrealized dreams, whatever it is. So I could certainly see that that resonates very strongly with the evolution of purpose. Um,
Mhm.
and then when I see self-management, to me, self-management resonates with the accountability aspect, but they're just saying apply it to yourself instead of having someone keep you accountable. It's always better for you to develop into someone who can manage your own activities, your own, life.
Mhm.
That is also an upgrade maneuver. But I'd also like to add that both having an evolving purpose and developing greater levels of self-management also carry a little bit of driver energy, a little bit of outgrid energy, because the evolution of the purpose, I'm going to believe, is directed towards a particular outcome. So it's not just having the purpose, it's actually doing something about that
Mhm.
purpose. And that would be that outgrid energy who wants to accomplish something. So I'm hearing a lot of upgrid, outgrid sorts of stuff. So self management, same thing. It's an upgrade maneuver when it first starts, but then you're basically saying to the person, move from being self managed to being self led, and now you're moving a little bit in the outgrid kind of energy by getting more engaged, et cetera, et cetera. And when I look at
Right.
wholeness, I think just based on my definition of that word as I see it for today's first time, um, that to me seems like a little bit more of a mid-grid
Mhm.
kind of an energy. So that feels like a PowerPoint kind of a
Exactly.
maneuver. And
Exactly.
so they would be saying that in companies that truly excel, the focus is placed on primarily upgrid maneuvers with a little bit of outgrid thrown in, and also PowerPoint kind of maneuvers.
Right. And to your point, that's what those other variables that are associated with that three-leg stool underscores is how to balance those. Because they said the organizations that were just so focused on that driver part, but from the organizational perspective and
Mhm.
not the individual perspective, they were out to balance.
Yeah,
And
so they
so,
need.
how do you balance those so that even the person that's doing this work, they feel a sense of connectedness to the purpose. So they're getting something out of it. And that's where the self management came in
Mhm.
because many of these companies had things like what I saw in HR when I was designing HR software is like less than, I think, 4% of companies actually design for engagement.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like they can model, financials and that kind of thing. So he talked about how companies created things like dashboards, so it gave people this connectedness to that accountability that you talked about, being responsible. They signed actual worker agreements that, wow, based on your talents, this is the expectations. Would
Mhm.
you agree to this? And this is how we can help you even learn and grow. So it's these kind of dynamics that were balanced. And that's why he just simplified it into a three-legged stool, but there's a lot connected to it.
Yeah, yeah, underneath each one of those. Hi, everybody who's joining in. Hi, Kathy. Hi, Shags. We've started talking a little bit about what's the name of this book again, gentlemen?
Reinventing organizations with
Reinventing Organizations by a French gentleman who did a long,
Frederic Laloux. I
Laloux.
guess it's Laloux. Okay. I
La-
don't know French.
Yeah,
uh,
no, this is the fellow that I mentioned way back when, Frederic Laloux, who introduced the TEAL organization and does work with the spiral dynamics.
mhm, mhm.
Right. That's Kathy, that's what it sounded like. It was very spiral dynamic-y.
Yeah, no, and he's been around for a while. He's got more of an anthropological approach to org design. So he's highly influential in moving in the work around moving organizations to teal, to
Okay,
that
very interesting. Yeah,
highest level.
well, and so I think this is really interesting. So Kathy, I don't know if you had joined us yet when Brian told us, well, what each one of those three legs are, but that
No,
got me thinking about these as being, I do believe that everything is tension management. And so when I look at this, it's either, when I look at a model, I know the model is either going to overlay on the change grid and help us to better understand what's going on. But some models are more about the implementation, the action taking, in which case it should resonate with the change grid maneuvers.
Yeah, he talks about a red organization, an amber organization, an orange organization, and a green organization before he gets to the teal. And I
Yep,
think all of those map to the change grid.
they do map to the change grid. They map very well to us going around that center of the change grid. I know I'm not showing that right now. I'm assuming I'm showing the screen. Um, but yeah, and it'd be interesting to take a look at going through each of those cycles on a business application. But I do have one other question I want to ask about the three-leg stool, and then we can decide if is this today's topic. I'm okay with it, is if you guys want it to be. But his last name is Lalou. Anyone know what Lalou means?
I don't.
well,
No.
it's either the fox or the rabbit?
It's the wolf, actually.
The
It's the
wolf, the wolf, the wolf.
right, yeah, the wolf.
Ah,
Yeah, right. La Loup. I think it's interesting that in French, it's anything that has la in front of it is a feminine word. So La Loup, they think wolves are female, or they give it a female noun.
hmm.
In our French club, we've been talking recently about how if we're going to have all this changing in pronouns and all that, what on earth do you do with a language that every noun has its own specified gender?
Mm.
There's very few gender neutral words in French. In English, I don't know that we have any gender specific nouns. I mean, maybe personal pronouns, but I don't think we have any gender specific nouns. But many languages do. So it'll be interesting to see what the tension is like, and the people who now have to fix languages at the, at the base level. So anyway, now my question though is really more about the population that he surveyed, because I can think of cultures who have developed businesses that are profoundly successful that don't do any aspect of this entire three-leg stool. So was he looking more at Western sort of businesses,
They're
or
all around. They're international. In fact, I think Stanford now is studying the Rendihei model that Kathy had shared before, like the Bertzork and the higher, the
yeah,
Chinese model,
sure.
and a lot of the, especially like the Silicon Valley companies, that are used to like the fast kind of growth, they're like, oh, this is quite difficult. Um, their mental model for experimenting with it hasn't gone as well. But he surveyed international companies in different sectors that
Mhm.
he started to work with, because the three-legged stool really underscores like how do we implement that. These things seem to be common in organizations in terms of you have people, you have to help people perform, in terms of engagement, but then also the tools. And he was looking at all these variables. So he was interested in, from what I read in some of his other works, like, well, why is there such a struggle with the implementation? Is there um, a framework? Is there a way of going about it that doesn't dehumanize people within the organization? You can still be consistent with organizational value. Like, how do we begin this alignment process? Was part
Right.
of his major thesis. And so he just started surveying various demographics and international different size companies, and he find that the ones that have the most difficulty, they have a really complex hierarchical structure. So he didn't necessarily say it's the hierarchical structure itself, but again, those that have a really difficult structure where like information flows or I don't get this in my division kind of thing is prevalent.
Right. Well,
There is just FYI, there is an organization, a blog called Enlightening Edge that takes Laloux's work and tracks it around teal from that you can follow, and I review that as part of a curatorial role that I play in organization design. But it's called Enlightening Edge if you want to follow that, or if anybody's interested enough in this concept with what Laloux's doing and the work of teal that's happening around the globe. So.
well, interesting. I guess I think that this certainly makes sense, and I can, obviously describe how it would really work well, but I just really still have a giant question mark about, oh, just a second, one moment. You guys talk. Linda, I'm on the call.
Kathy, did you read that book?
I have it, and I haven't read it through and through because I have eye issues, and so I haven't fully read it from cover to cover, but I refer to it a lot. Yeah, so I'm trying to find where it is in the three-legged stool that you're talking about, but I understand and have spent time talking with people and understanding the concepts. I mean, he's the one, I mean, I think as you recall, when we were doing spiral dynamics, I mentioned that Frederick Laloux is the one who applied that whole thing organizationally.
Right.
He actually did the analysis from orange to teal and red, and understanding that, for the most part, most organizations are in the orange, the red and orange phases now. Most countries are, and we spent a lot of time talking about this. So, I can't honestly say I've read it every little thing from cover to cover. I've studied it and know enough about it to be able to work with it. So,
Do you think teal is the solution?
I don't know if it's the solution. I think it is. It is certainly a solution. I think there are a lot of organizations that are moving to teal around the globe, mostly in Europe. They aren't many happening here, just because we happen to have more of a hierarchical mindset and more of an individual value system. And it's very hard for cultures with individual value systems to move to teal because it requires group orientation. So there are many countries around the globe that have much more of a group orientation than we do. But it is an answer. I think ultimately it's, whether it's the answer, I think it is where mankind needs to move if we're going to solve world problems. If we're going to move away from the mess that we're in. And I think that there, again, a lot of small organizations have moved to teal, or moving to as close to teal as you're going to get, but and have teal practices rather than necessarily.
Let me just check it for just a second. First of all, I'm hearing someone rustle in their microphone. So we're getting a lot of like movements happening, a lot of like someone's brushing up against their microphone. So if you guys can just check your orientation there, that'd be very nice. I just wanted to throw out my one question about, I know of a lot of Asian cultures who have a very different model of how they go about getting what they consider to be excellence from their people. And I would say that it doesn't seem to resonate with what I'm looking at here. So that's why I was asking, was he profiling all of the different cultures as he came up with this? Because my hesitation is that it feels like we are trying to apply this model to the entire planet. And I get it from a spiral dynamics perspective, sooner or later that's going to happen. But there are always going to be early adopters, mid adopters, late adopters. And I think that one of the ways that we have to kind of understand this movement is to try to figure out who are going to be the early adopters and who are going to be the late adopters. So to Kathy's point, there are already a lot of cultures out there that started off with this as how their culture operates. They do work more collectively, and they do have a greater appreciation for the role of the individual in the organization, and growth in the individuals will sooner or later become growth in the organization. So there's a lot of cultures that have always been that way.
Right.
And then there's those of us that are going like, well, in the US, some are, some aren't. We've got lots of work to do. But when I think about cultures where there's tremendous levels of not just hierarchy, but a level of arrogance. And I think in Korea, some of the companies are called, is it Chaebol? It's these long family owned kind of enterprises, and no one dare look at one of the superiors in the wrong way. I mean, they're viewed as being like gods and all
Yeah.
this sort of stuff. And so I don't think they're going to be quick to the table on this.
No, they probably won't. But he did, survey cultures, different cultures and things. And he's, from what I read in some of his other work, was really about, figuring out the best way to apply some of it. Like he was just trying to, I think, underscore what, like Kathy was talking about, the communal aspect, because
Yes.
there seems to be that kind of disconnect in a lot of corporations in terms of understanding
Right.
that,
And,
number
and I,
one,
I
the
think
business don't run itself. There's
Yeah,
people.
but Brian, the only thing I'm throwing out there is that I don't think that looking at it at just the organizational level um, is going to be all that. What's my word? It's just not that easy. There are cultural elements that come into play first and perhaps more powerfully. And those companies or a lot of organizations exist or an extension of that culture.
Right,
So
right.
I think we're looking at, when we look at this, we go like, oh yeah, this is a wonderful culture to aspire to, but it is first and foremost a culture. People have to believe that this is going to work. Now, from a spiral dynamic perspective, you guys do understand that movement up the spiral can take generations.
Hmm.
So this may very well be something that certain countries or certain cultures have long practiced, and we're learning from those cultures, and now we're trying to introduce it to more Western sorts of the rest of the Western sort of world kinds of things, and that sooner or later we're going to do it. But I can't imagine that any one of us would um, say, we just have to go to one of these cultures that has this really strict hierarchy. They tend to be more Asian in their cultural patterns and all that, and just say, look, you guys are wrong, you need to do it this way instead.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think for them, they kind of bring it forward with like, a little bit at a time in terms of what's working, what isn't working.
if I can just comment here about that, I mean, I don't think there are many cultures in the world that do are teal at all. I think that there were, I mean, indigenous cultures tend to be more teal, but industrialized and quote unquote modern cultures do not tend to be, because they're all based on hierarchy in some fashion. So what people are trying to do is get back to a kind of a communal kind of model. But if you look at Native Americans and some early other indigenous cultures in Australia and around the world, there is that, and there are a couple of organizations in the Netherlands like Beiersdorf that works with many teal practices, but very few modern cultures can operate under teal in a teal way because of how hierarchical the
Yeah.
cultures are that surround them, as T was saying. So that's been the conundrum around implementing teal practices in organizations. And then I'll be quiet about it. But
Oh,
that
no,
was
no, no. I think this is really, this to me is
Mhm.
the most important part of this, because when I look at, I've been looking at teal organizations for a very long time, and the qualities that are associated with a teal organization, and, the principles, et cetera. But I've always thought that we're looking at a process that could take generations to actually for us to evolve into it. And to Kathy's point, it's because until someone is willing to even make the thought possible of abandoning hierarchical arrangements, then where is the environment for a self-management organization to arise? And how effective can I be if I'm actually part of a very teal organization, but I have to operate in a hierarchical world?
A
You know?
hierarchical world or regulated world, so like even in healthcare in the US, this vision uh, from the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, which accredits hospitals. So their vision is to create what they call learning healthcare organizations or learning organizations. Learning organizations are all about this idea of continuous process improvement throughout. So it's all of the cornerstone being information, people, and
Mhm.
the technology. But
Yeah.
they're having a hard time getting people to adopt to it.
Well, no doubt, because
He,
it probably got handed down to them through a hierarchy.
Hmm.
he
I mean,
actually gave some very compelling examples. There was one, Brian, do you remember in Scandinavia, the nurses organization?
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's the one that Kathy had mentioned, the
yeah, that's in
Bursor.
Beiersdorf. Yeah, that's Beiersdorf, and it's in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and they developed a teal organization that was very successful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
The thing to understand, I mean, learning organizations, I mean, have been around when I was started in HR, back in the 80s. I mean, that's learning organizations have been around forever. The concepts have been around forever. And people have been doing that within hierarchies for a long, long time. I mean, I've worked in organizations that way and have designed organizations that way. So that's been around. Self-managing teams have been around since
Sure.
the 80s. So aspects of teal and self-management have been around in hierarchies for a
Mhm.
long time. It's a question of moving to that complete teal model that I think is so very, very difficult. Yeah, Beiersdorf has been able to do it successfully in its own isolated kind of model. And the Netherlands is open, much more open to that. They are hierarchical, but they're much more open to that than many other Western countries are.
Mhm.
So there's that need to have a supporting culture in with organizations that are able to manage that in healthcare. I mean, I have friends who've done a lot of work with Beiersdorf and are familiar with it, but so there's all of that, and what everyone is saying is valid, but I just wanted to give you that
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah.
Somebody who's been around these things for a really long time, that's been, people have been working toward it, and trying it, but our country and many of our corporations are moving away from aspects of hierarchy in some instances, but as a country we're moving back toward hierarchy in many ways. So there's a lot of push and pull right now, a lot of struggle with those concepts, I think, in this time, in our world.
So we need
Yeah,
more like a more integration. Is that what we're not seeing enough of? was more fragmented instead of being integrated or at least synthesized in a way that's meaningful to an organization or to, various industries or sectors, it seems like. Is that what we're missing?
Well, in healthcare, it's probably the most glaring example of fragmentation, structural fragmentation that you're going to find. Um, uh, because well, I mean, I don't have to tell you why. I mean, you know it's there. But so integration is one component of it, but you can have a very successful, highly integrated organization that is hierarchical and very successful. So, it's not about success. It's more about what are we, how are we able to operate in terms of inclusivity and systemic success rather than organizational success. So you think in terms of ecosystem success. How our ecosystems require more of a communal approach to decision making, so organizations can operate very effectively hierarchically and do very, very well. And you can see that all over the world,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But there's a belief that this is a better way of doing things. Is that what's came out of this research, or this is the point of the book?
Yeah.
This is better.
Yeah, that
this like it's efficient.
This is the spiral dynamic that we're moving toward at team, that we've talked about from system.
Yeah. Okay, so do you think that this kind of movement along the spiral dynamic is driven by organizations or is driven by individuals? I mean, when I look at this, I go, how many individuals do I even know that have a solid three-leg stool in their own life, thinking of their life as an enterprise or their life as a business? Are they good self-managers? Do they have the wholeness aspect addressed? Are they evolving their purpose?
It's got to be driven by organizations. It's got to be driven by ecosystems, from my standpoint.
Yeah, probably maybe a little bit of both, but one more indirectly. In other words, if you look at like burnout, stress, I think people are sick and tired of being sick and tired. So, that's what the whole, what was that, quiet quitting and quiet this and all that nonsense. So that kind of, organizations start looking at that and they're like, okay, yeah, the way we're doing things isn't working, and you get tired of burning people out. Plus, if you think about it, I always talk about the way organizations are transacting their business with people is causing economics deprivation, because people are getting sick from going to work. Like the stress, burnout, it has an economic cost to it.
Yes.
So it seems like to me they have to change, both upstream and downstream. We have to find better ways of working. We have to find, organizations need to be understanding how they're complicit in driving up these costs. And this is what organizations that I've been consulting are trying to do, is how do we drive down the costs in terms of occupational phenomena called burnout and stress.
And so I guess, and I was doing a little bit of a search here. There are a lot of companies out there that are talking about a teal organization. There are a lot out there that are using these three standard legs. So this concept is not only very well established, but it is central to a great many independent practices that are going on out there. And so my question really becomes more of how is this supposed to be marketed, and what does it take to really implement it? And you know what, I guess I'm just trying to figure out the business side of this.
Well, if you look at where we're at, if green is where we have to be, if we're moving into teal, there are a lot of challenges with green.
Yeah, there are a lot of things, particularly since we can still see lots of orange evidence going on.
Sure, even some red.
Yeah, yeah, even some of the red stuff is going on, they're throwing in, I don't know who put this little chart together. I did like this, but they're saying a couple of the colors are a little bit different. Like, I guess in strict spiral dynamics from long ago, teal would have been yellow. So who cares what they're really labeling? It's really more about the description as we evolve through that. So again, this is my only concern from a tension management perspective.
Mhm.
I have no doubt whatsoever that achieving this teal organization could be a very effective way to manage people, optimize performance, sustain individual growth, and all the benefits that comes through that. This feels very enlightened, all that kind of stuff. I'm not arguing with any of that whatsoever. I'm saying from a tension management perspective, when this gets introduced, and again, we talked about there are early adopters, there's going to be a bunch of late adopters. There's going to be people who are not only on board, but they are openly detracting from this, openly defying it, openly undermining it, right? And so, what is the tension management aspect that's going on here? Because
Yeah.
for this to work, I'm assuming we got to be in the middle of the change grid.
Well, I would argue that based on, and Brian was spot on when he was talking earlier, it's a social movement
Mhm.
that is going to push it because shareholders and organizational leaders are going to have to come to the conclusion that things just aren't working anymore. I mean, there
Right.
is a total breakdown is going to be required in the existing structures and systems and hierarchies for this to move forward, to create a gap
Mhm.
for this to move forward, because the beginnings are already there. I mean, a lot of people are already doing it, but without a breakdown and without a major social movement and series of social movements around the world pushing this
Mhm.
by coming from below, I believe,
There we go.
and coming and that's what it is. You asked whether it was an individual or organizations. Well, it's groups of individuals, it's movements, it's all of that, that's gonna make that kind of change, as we talked about way back when, up the spiral dynamic.
That's right. That's right. But
Mhm.
you just said what I was looking for, what I wanted to hear someone throw into the dialogue, and that is that this all begins because someone feels as though the system as it is either taking control away from them or not giving them an opportunity to gain the control they would like to have.
Hmm.
So, so, and I get it. Once one person feels that way, they're very likely to stumble across other people who feel that way. And as they discover more and more people are of that same sort of feeling, somebody has to step up to the leadership position. By the way, right there's a hierarchy. So someone has to say, this is what I can do. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to announce it. Maybe if they're going to stay true to Teal, they would say, that doesn't make me anybody's boss. This just happens to be my skill set. And so I'm going to do this on behalf of the whole organization. That's what I think Kathy's point about it has to be a movement first. And it has to be a movement of substantial size in order for it to get, what do we say, enough notice that it can actually have the impact that we know it can have.
Well,
Mhm.
I think, T, that the pandemic, caught us right in the middle of green. And now people are looking for different solutions for corporate structures, for engagement, for work styles, for different things like that. I think there is a series of movements that is happening. I
Mhm.
don't know that they're going to lead to Teal, but there are a series of movements going on.
Yeah, well, and keep in mind if we believe that spiral dynamics is a want to say as a universal principle of the evolution of our society, of our values, and that we're going to end up in teal sooner or later. We're going to end up there, and then we're going to end up in turquoise, and then we're going to end up in indigo or coral, whatever color they want to call it. We can't stop movement up the spiral all we can do is slow it down or support its forward progress. And so that's why I'm saying, like, there's always going to be people who are going to be detracting from it and fighting against it. So I'm just wondering, I like the idea about this being positioned as a movement, as a time in our cultures, in our society, where we want to make people aware of this. I think it's a great benefit that we can point to some examples of teal in action to be able to show what its benefits are, whatever. But the thought that we can just it just doesn't feel like a very solid business enterprise to be developing at this stage.
You know, they gave a couple of American examples of teal organizations, and frankly, I wasn't impressed by one. They mentioned Patagonia and Ben and Jerry's
Okay.
as examples of teal organizations that have had great success and great accomplishment through the teal model.
Yeah,
I'm not that deep into the book, so there probably are a lot of other examples.
yeah. I mean, Patagonia, if you study Patagonia, I mean, Patagonia is a really wonderful organization that takes social values very strongly, and it's not fully teal, you know, nothing's fully teal right now, but it's much closer than many other organizations, and it's also, you know, a privately run organization. And so there are ways to do it, and find a way to find a space in the hierarchical capitalist system as we know it, you know, and the way we approach, as we currently approach things. So Patagonia is actually a closer example of how it can be done. But again, to T's point, being fully teal requires more of a fully teal environment.
Mhm.
And I wonder, is that the overarching goal per se, to be fully teal, as it is to understand some of those components of it and maybe create your own model of efficiency? Because I see it in the same way, like when I think about how social movement started, like, you know, even in the apartheid in South Africa, started as one thing in terms of a theme, but there were so many uh, supporting themes underneath it that's needed to be addressed. And so now, you know, although there's no longer apartheid, some of those things that dismantled it still hasn't worked its way out. So now the party, Nelson Mandela's party, has lower approval rating than Biden because of like education, some of those things that still have not been fully realized, but people still benefit from not having apartheid. So I'm wondering, is it the same thing within these organizations, right? Because we know
Yes.
that the systems today isn't working. So we just keep going at the same rate and doing the same things. I don't see it getting any better. So maybe it's like we adopt some of it and then, you know, some of it generations later come to fruition and we
Yeah.
keep moving.
That's how organization change works. It's very messy. It's never, you know, it's never clean. It's never of one for moving from one ideology to another. I mean, look at democracy. I mean, it's a work in progress, you know. So um, it's um, it's it's always messy. Organizational change, all of that type of change is always very messy. It's never going to be that clean.
Mm-hmm. You know, when I read the book, what I took away from it is this idea that it's an ongoing project,
Yep.
right? That's how I seen it. Like
Yeah.
it's this ongoing project, this ongoing experimentation, because I don't think it's going to be one thing. Because like I said, I've gotten to the point after X many years of thinking that I was going to come to America and change the healthcare system. But then I see like, wow, okay, there's so many stakeholders and actors, each have its own incentivization. So there's no way there's just going to be one actor that comes in reinvent healthcare, you know. So I just got to the point like it's going to be a great project, a great experimentation of various things that can come together, hopefully learn to work together, that incentivize for whom you're targeting, which is ultimately patients, but it's definitely not going to be one actor, one entity. So when I see the Amazons of the world, all these companies talking about how they're reinventing healthcare for doing greater sameness, I'm like, that's nonsense.
Yeah, yeah. It's like saying the president's this country's gonna change the country. That's not gonna happen. It's just, and I think your example of South Africa is a great one. It's a work in progress, and it's gonna be a back and a forth and a tug and a, pull and it's gonna be about the movement ultimately of what people are willing to tolerate.
Mm.
Uh,
That's an interesting word because
Yep.
it applies to a lot of different people in a lot of different current types of organizations. And one thing that I would be wondering is that as an organization becomes increasingly teal, do we see a lot of a narrowing of the range of compensations packages that are offered to the people participating in this egalitarian kind of an organization? That would mean we would need executives who are, by anyone's standards, grossly overpaid for whatever it is they happen to be doing. Are they going to be willing to watch their personal revenue go down? Are they willing to take the political risks, all that? So I guess what I'm just saying is that this ultimately becomes a giant exercise in tension management. And we
Mm.
have to be managing tension at the individual level. If enough people don't feel out of control in their current situation, they're not going to be ones who are providing evidence to their HR teams or whatever that we need to change our culture. We need to become more teal. We want to become more teal. There has to be a movement, as Kathy has pointed out there. That movement starts with one person. It starts at the personal level. Now, even if you've got someone who's a business owner and they decide from inception they want to create a teal organization, you still have this one person who has that as what their desired outcome happens to be. And, that might end up being far more effective than a bottom up way of evolving. So yeah.
Yeah, and
I,
I would just like to make one more comment here about this. I mean, if you look around in nature, hierarchy exists in nature. Hierarchy, there's nothing wrong with hierarchy per se. It's a question of how you work it, how you
Mhm.
recognize it, how you use it. So hierarchy is natural and exists everywhere, in physics, and all of that. It's just the way we use it. It's getting back to that notion of power over versus power with,
Mhm.
and and it's about structure of hierarchy and how power is used. And to me, that's the evolution.
Mhm. That's
Well, and
brilliant.
even, I don't know what I just did here. Even, no, I don't want to sign up. Thank you though for the opportunity. Uh, it says sees natural hierarchy and system of systems. That's part of what
Right.
Teal was characterized as being. So I did chat over to everybody an article that I thought gives a pretty good glimpse into what we've been talking about. So here it's talking about some examples of the organization. Certainly Bert Zorges, Kathy had already mentioned, and if you scroll down here, I don't know, Favi, a brass foundry in France. Okay, and then Morningstar Tomato Processing Company, interesting, in Patagonia. There we go. So there are some real examples they're pointing out for all that. So I thought I'd just chat this over to everybody. So if you find merit in it, then there we go. Um,
I
so
think what Kathy was just saying was important about like, you know, and what you just described is natural, right? Because what he's talking about are living systems, but this is the disconnect that I see a lot of organizations don't understand how living systems, which an organization is, it has people in it, how it can function where even divergence and convergence can work together because all living systems have the same characteristics.
Okay.
Same four characteristics. They all have parts, they all have an emergent whole, they all have dynamic relationships, and they all have self-integrating properties, which by itself you don't get to understand that living system, but it's divergent parts into a convergent whole that literally it synthesizes from moment to moment a process of self-organization and self-creation.
Mhm.
All living systems throughout biology has it.
Sure. And so I guess, I'm always going back to my core question. This is a tension management opportunity or a tension management puzzle to be filled out. Where does it begin? If you wanted to streamline our movement up the spiral, how do you go about doing that? Because I mean, it's great if you can stumble across someone who's already aligned with this way of thinking, who've already read the books, who've already started to explore. Well, that's really lovely. But I'm sorry, a handful of companies does not the world change.
Yeah.
I would argue, T, that I don't think you do streamline the process up. I think it's really messy. I think it happens through major, like COVID is a perfect example of a disruptor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That disruptor is what unfolded or revealed a
Yes.
whole array of issues with the current system. And, as you quiet quitting is one example of it, people resisting going back to work the same way. People go resisting going back to horrible jobs that don't pay them anything, service jobs that are just
Or
horrible
where they're treated in ways other than the way they'd like to be treated.
and don't make more than $10 a day, some of them. I mean, Uber
Right.
driver, I mean, it's just horrific. So
Right.
you have this disruption happening, and it's not messy, and it's messy, and I don't think there is a way to move it. I mean, it's going to happen over time as people start discovering and working together in disparate parts of the world, and find ways and share ways.
Mhm.
And it's one of the benefits of social media, right now, that you can share this, but I don't see it as a smooth change process.
No, I'm not suggesting that
I'm
it
sure.
is or that it ever could be. I'm saying I believe we can make it smoother. And
Hmm.
I'm saying that because definitive change occurs two places on the change grid. So upgrade changes are driven by external factors. What if the pandemic had never occurred? How much
Hmm.
further would that have slowed things down? So, are we counting on these external factors to appear when they appear and do whatever it is they end up doing? Or maybe we can say, well, change also occurs outgrid. We can make a conscious, deliberate, definitive choice about
Hmm.
how we want to be and what we want to do, and then we can operate in according with those values. Remember, spiral dynamics is about the evolution of human values. And
Hmm.
why can't I say, well, if it is to be, then what can we actively do right now to promote this, to educate people about it, to prove the case for why it is a more effective way of doing things? I'd like to believe that there are things we can do to smooth it out and speed it up, rather than.
I agree, T, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
And
think the challenge, see, I think has been, at least from my own perspective, what I see is like it seems that humanity, and I say it in general, seems to be at a point where we seem to respond out of crises, so that upgrade.
of course,
Because now it's like, this idea of these extreme behaviors when disagreement doesn't seem to be this balance of common ground. It's kind of like healthcare informatics, like the projects that I'm working on here. we didn't start with, oh, this is the idea that is going to be funded. The reason this is taking so long is because we're starting what we call stakeholder value. So it's like talking to citizens on the ground, finding out how they're experiencing. Where's the gap between what they're experiencing and what these healthcare systems here are, say, they're delivering. So we're starting from the end process of whom is going to impact and then reverse engineer everything around it. That gives us a better understanding, at least, on how these two key stakeholders can work together, and then how the stakeholders within the stakeholders can work together. But it seems like there's not enough of that kind of thinking at scale. Like humanity seems to respond out of crises, and then it's kind of like, this, excuse my language, like this oh shit moment where it's like, oh, we got to wake up now.
Right. Right. So I guess my question is, we do recognize that the likelihood of achieving majority tealness within our lifetime is probably not a realistic expectation. And so this is something that future generations, in fact, one of the articles that I just stumbled across on this whole subject describes teal as being the management approach of the future. And so right there, they're even acknowledging that while progress is being made and stuff is happening, there's a lot of work left to do. And to Kathy's point, it's going to be messy, particularly if it ends up being something that is being driven by external factors, because external factors are almost always inherently messy. So, so I just go like, well, is this really then a principle, a value that we should be instilling in children, at least in high school or college or whatever age they need to be ready for this, when we can create a generation of people who are already aligned with teal thinking, then the likelihood of them having teal expectations as they enter the workforce and ultimately build teal organizations is a lot better. I mean,
we can create anything through education, and we have,
That's my thought.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But it requires a purposeful approach. No, I think that's what we should be doing.
Yeah. And ultimately,
yeah.
Right. And I don't know how that's what they're doing. That's why I said from the business aspect of this, having teal consultants out there, I'm sure there's a bunch. Like I said, I did a search and stumbled across all kinds of businesses about that. A lot of it feels, how can I put this, simultaneously necessary and premature. So
kind of forced on
yeah,
them.
forced, or it's just early
Yeah.
stage where maybe they're getting some funding through grants or whatever. Maybe they can stumble across a certain kind of company who's might not be ready to become a teal company, but might be ready to have a teal department or a teal project that they are working on, even if they're calling it a test, or if it just lends itself to whatever the situation happens to be. I can see how that might be something that's happening, but in order to achieve tealness.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it is forced in smaller organizations around the world. It's just that there are so many forces, countervailing forces right now, as we've talked about, around power, that make it hard to do. But I think it generally is, based on what I've seen, in my experience with org designers, a movement, an organizational movement around the world. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, good. And because that's what it's ultimately going to take. So I would like to think that right now that this concept is being supported, deployed, promoted, whatever, at a lot of different levels. Yeah. But from a tension management perspective, the most efficient way to get to the outcome would be to work on the values of the next group of employees. Because ultimately, organizations will have little, if any, choice but to adapt to what the demand of the workforce happens to be. So the moment the workforce says, I'm only interested in companies that do this teal kind of model, that are, actively living this, otherwise I'm not even going to interview with them. Well, how fast do you think companies would embrace tealness?
Yeah. Well, it seems like the timing of that would be now if the statistics are accurate, that the millennials is, I think 35% is what I last read of the American workforce in particular.
Mhm.
And they certainly don't want to work like my generation and, even boomers. They're not looking to do that kind of thing. In fact, I think,
It's already happening. It's
yeah,
already happening. Yeah,
yeah.
it's already happening, and that's great. It's really nice to see. Yeah.
Mhm. Yep. So anyway, that's what I find that I think is really interesting. I think that ultimately it's going to be driven by we've talked about this so many times, that an organization can put together whatever change initiative they think is going to make their world the way they want it. Ultimately, the success of that change initiative is completely in the hands of the employees.
Right.
So,
I just hope it won't become a fad. You know what I mean? Like another management theory, this kind of thing. Like I like the model. I like the uh from a tension management perspective that it potentially can get to undercurrent issues of behaviors. Like in healthcare, I call it beyond the diagnosis, right? So we
sure.
can see the physical aspect, but the mental, emotional are connected to it. So why not address that? Or, put that into some kind of format so the patient can say, "Oh yeah, well, I have this physical issue, but the mental and emotional, keeping myself stress free or at least minimizing it, can be impactful as well."
Right,
Mm.
right.
I don't think it is a fad. I think it's been around a really long time, and I mean, unless we all implode before it happens,
Right,
you know,
right.
yeah, I don't think it's a fad.
Yeah.
I really
No,
don't.
I don't think it's a fad, but I would not be surprised as the topic becomes more widely recognized and people who just want to make some money want to
Mhm.
jump on board or whatever. I could certainly see how some of these providers might ultimately try to fadify it. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Because they don't want to do the real work.
Mhm.
Obviously, everyone who's involved in it right now, they're doing the real work. But there's always going to be people who are going to exploit the opportunity. And then we have to worry about, well, what's pure and what is really just an embellishment for marketing purposes or whatever.
Mhm.
And I think that also speaks to where the concept is on its own evolutionary path. So I'll bet when it was first proposed, it was something that would have been more aspirational than practical. And
Mhm.
then time went on and some people embraced it and started doing some things. And it started to have some very practical benefits and, applications. We had examples we can point to, et cetera. But I would think that at this point in time, it's still primarily an aspirational kind of a model than it is a practical kind of a model. The only thing that's going to change it, of course, is for more people to begin practicing it. And so once they start that's what makes something practical, is that you can practice it. So so I think that they're in their own little growth stage there. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Is it good? So
Yeah.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. Is it the enlivening edge or the enlightening edge?
The enlivening edge.
in
Oh,
life.
all right. Because I looked up a lightning edge and they charge $14.95 a month.
Yeah. Well,
Well, I get it for free, so I don't know what, I mean, I just get it sent to me. So,
Mhm.
and I don't pay for any of that stuff. So,
yeah, yeah.
it's enlivening edge. You can try it. I was just trying to find it on my email, but I must have let it go. I just couldn't find it. But yeah, enlivening edge, and they have all kinds of articles, people contributors to that, that talk about teal a lot, and there are whole teal conventions around the world.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
they
Yep.
hold on a regular basis. So yeah.
Yep.
Yes, enliveningedge.org.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. 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 All right. Well, really very interesting sort of stuff. So, yeah, yeah, yep. I'm glad that you brought it up, and I
Thank
will.
you, Brian, for bringing it up. It's near and dear to my heart. So thank you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, Kathy, what I mentioned about aspirational versus practical, where do you think it is on that continuum?
Well, I think it's probably, 60% aspirational, 40%
Yeah.
practical,
All right.
in smaller businesses. I think that more and more people are aware of it. People who are in the business of looking at organizations are have become really aware of it. But and are fighting, within organizations to move them in that direction, and they have for a long time without necessarily calling it teal,
Yep.
for many years. But like I said, I think that it's going to take a few more disruptions. And by the way, I don't necessarily see disruptions as all that external. I mean, COVID was seen as an external disruption from that standpoint. But I think we create our own disruptions, in our own way. So that's another way of thinking about it.
Yep, yep. I'm fine with personally generated disruptions. And I guess that's what I'm really saying is that if you do want to streamline the process or accelerate the process, then we need to be more outgrid in this
Yes.
exploration of um, the disruptions, you know? So,
Yes. Thank you for that. And thank you for T for noting the importance of the external culture within
yeah,
the
I
org.
mean, it's a big deal because I don't know enough about every culture around the world, but we all know enough about these generational businesses in Asian countries that I'm telling you, they're going to be the late adopters.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. No
In
doubt.
fact, there was some research, I forget the university, but they said many of the older Asian country companies, they lasted like thousands of years, whereas like the average American company now, you still have some big ones, the GEs and that kind of thing, but it's typically like 10 to 15 years.
Yeah,
And they had studied the why of that. And it
right,
goes
right.
back to what you were talking about, that family structure.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah. They're not publicly owned.
right. Well,
Hmm.
and so here's the thing. We can say, give me a success case for this teal concept, and someone's going to give me Patagonia. All right. Then we're going to go, what's the oldest business on the planet? Do you guys know what the oldest business, continually operating business is on the planet?
No.
Other
Probably
than
Constitution.
prostitution.
Nope. It is a manufacturer of soy sauce. And
Okay.
Oh,
they
it's
have
pretty
been,
close.
they've been manufacturing soy sauce for I don't even begin to know whatever, but they're the oldest one now. It makes me want to look it up. Well, they're going to go like when you've got 1,000-year track record of your success in structuring and operating a business, you come and talk to us.
Yeah, yeah, of
Yeah,
course. Of
You know,
course.
so they're just not going to be letting it go.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, the oldest, here it is. The oldest company on earth is Congo Gumi, continual operating company in the world. It's headquartered is Osaka. Now that's interesting. That's a construction company. So which one is
That's
this?
Japan, right? That's Japan.
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
Japan.
Well, think about Japan as the most closed,
Mhm.
um, yet group-oriented cultures in the world.
Hmm.
Okay.
But it's the most closed, and it's the most diametrically opposite the US of any culture in the world.
Interesting. Yep. Hmm. Yeah. Congo Gumi is 1,428 years old.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah, there's actually a winery in Germany that's 1,156 years old.
Mm.
So yeah, do a little search on it. You'll find out the soy one is the oldest manufacturer in the world. So
That's great. That's great.
yeah, there you go. Anyway, that's just my point. There's going to be late adopters, and there, who knows? There could also be never adopters. They're just going to become more of a strange little quirky boutique organization that everyone, accepts, even though they haven't, adopted the teal mindset. As David pointed out, there's still companies out there that are back in red. So, we're not going to watch everybody move up the spiral together or at the same rate, the same time. No, everyone's on
It'd
their
be
own.
interesting to think if there were actually industries that were more prevalent to teal than, others.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there are. Yeah, there are. I mean, they tend to be more service organizations. They're I'm trying to think off the top of my head now, and some family owned or privately manufacturers who have adopted teal values and live by and manage by teal values or teal like values. I'm not going to say teal values, teal like values. Yeah.
Yep. Interesting.
Very.
Yep. All right. There you go. So thanks everybody for joining in. We will pick up where we left off on the last call. Oh, very important for you to know. No call on Thursday this week. Our street is being switched to fiber optic. So they're coming through and replacing everybody's line. Who wanted it? Everybody's lines to fiber optic now running into the house. And our scheduled time is right at 10 a.m., which is the start time for this call. So,
good luck.
I'm a heavy sigh.
You'll see, get a load of this. Our upload speed, download speed, 600 megabytes per second, both upload and download.
Wow.
And, it's less money than we're paying for Cox right now, Cox cable.
I use Cox right now, and but that's fantastic, T.
It is 65 bucks a month. I mean, that's pretty cheap.
That is pretty cheap.
What's the company?
No
I
installation.
pay $100 a month for Comcast.
Yeah, there you go. No installation charges, no equipment that you have to rent, no contract that you have to sign.
Wow. Who is this?
Love it.
It's called Wired, WYYRED.
Oh, wow.
And so they're kind of becoming the new thing in the valley, but Cox is terrified. Yeah.
Oh, I'll bet.
They need to be. They're horrible.
Yeah, well, truly. But anyway, you guys just need to know, I doubt very much I'll have internet access for most of the day.
Okay.
So, okay, I will send out an email to remind everybody. I guess I should do that before they shut down the internet. Sorry. All right, thanks everybody. Bye for now.
Have a good day, everybody.
Yeah.